She found it on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic Tuesday. Not a Tuesday she had braced for or prepared herself for or seen coming from any distance. Just an ordinary Tuesday in August, in a dead woman's bedroom closet, with a rubber band dried to nothing and a shoebox that had been sitting on a shelf behind winter coats for 28 years, waiting for someone to finally pick it up. She almost didn't. That is the part that will stay with her. That she stood there in the cedar-end wool dark of her Aunt Rosie's closet and almost put the box back. Almost chose not to know. Almost walked out of that house with her inventory list and her car keys and her organized, airtight life completely intact. Nadia Ford was 34 years old. She was worth a little under $800 million, depending on the quarter, the kind of number that stops meaning anything and starts just being a fact about you, like your height or your blood type. She had a law degree from Vanderbilt and a social work certification from the University of Memphis and 47 families she had personally put back together through the Memphis juvenile court system. 47 fathers she had sat across from in courthouse hallways and helped find the words that got them back to their children. She had 4 men behind her who had wanted to marry her and hadn't understood why she kept saying no. She had a 7-year-old girl named Priya who was 3 weeks away from becoming her daughter, legally, permanently, finally. And she had a story she had been carrying since she was 6 years old, a story about a man who walked away, who looked at his daughter and made a choice, and the choice was not her. A story she had never questioned, never examined, never thought to hold up to the light, because it had arrived before she was old enough to know that stories can be engineered. That the people who love you most are sometimes the ones most capable of handing you a lie and calling it the truth. Inside that shoebox was 28 years of proof that the story was not real. Her father had never left. He had been kept out. And the person who kept him out, who intercepted every letter, who hired attorneys to threaten him into silence, who used the full weight of a generational family fortune to erase one man from his daughter's life and replace him with an absence she was told was his choice, was her mother. The woman Nadia trusted above every living person on earth. The woman who had loved her completely and damaged her completely and called both things by the same name. Her father died 4 months ago, in a hospice in Nashville, alone, still asking the nurses if his daughter had ever called. She had not. She had not known to call. She had not known there was anything to call about. Welcome back to Fortune Vault Chronicles. If you are finding us for the first time today, I am so glad you are here. And if you have been here before, you already know what we do. We sit down with the stories that are too complicated for a headline, the ones that don't resolve cleanly, the ones that make you put your phone down for a minute and just think. Before we go any further, I want to take just a moment. Father, we ask for presence in this room today. For the people watching this who are carrying something they haven't named yet, a grief, a question, a closed door they don't know the history of, we ask that this story finds them, that it speaks the thing they haven't been able to say. Amen. Now, let me tell you about Nadia Ford. Let me tell you what gets built on top of a lie, and what happens decades later when the foundation finally cracks. To understand what the lie cost her, you have to understand what Nadia Ford looked like from the outside. From the outside, she looked like everything. She was the granddaughter of Loretta Hargrove, who had built a Memphis real estate empire across 3 zip codes starting in the 1970s, when nobody wanted to sell to a black woman, and she bought anyway through patience and precision and intermediaries, and a ferocity she wore like a second skin. By the time Nadia's mother, Charlene, was born, the Hargrove name meant something in certain Memphis circles. Not just money, though there was money. It meant the kind of social weight that makes problems disappear. The kind of weight that can make a phone call go away. That can make a man go away. That can make an entire version of events become the official version with enough time and enough silence and enough resources applied in exactly the right directions. Nadia had grown up inside that weight without fully understanding it. She had been to the right schools, had sat at Sunday dinners that ran 3 hours and watched the women around her manage the world through the sheer, elegant force of their certainty, and she had learned to do the same. She was a Hargrove woman, which meant composed, which meant precise, which meant she did not discuss certain things, and the things she did not discuss were never the ones she most needed to. But she had gone a different direction than the rest of them. While her cousins took their inheritance and sat on boards and attended galas, Nadia had gone to law school and then immediately turned around and gotten a social work certification, which had caused the kind of quiet family scandal that Hargrove women handled through tight smiles and significant pauses. She had taken a position at the Memphis Juvenile Court, not as an attorney, but as a reunification specialist. And she had spent the last 8 years sitting across from fathers the system had written off and helping them fight their way back to their children. 47 times. She kept the list on her phone, every name, every case, every family she had put back together. She read it at night when she couldn't sleep, which was most nights. She had never once questioned why she found it comforting, had never once considered that the list might be, at its deepest level, an act of grief. You cannot trace a wound you don't know you have. The morning this story begins, she was in a courthouse hallway, and a man named Terrence was pressing his palms flat against his thighs and staring at the linoleum. Terrence was 41 years old, 3 DUIs, 2 years clean, a daughter named Bree, age 9, who had drawn him a butterfly on construction paper and whom he had not been allowed to see in 14 months. He kept the drawing folded in his breast pocket like a credential. He was terrified. Nadia could see it in the rigid set of his jaw and the way he kept swallowing. She leaned forward. "Terrence, when the judge asks why she should believe you this time, what are you going to say?" He looked up. His eyes were the specific, grinding kind of tired that does not come from not sleeping. It comes from carrying something for years and not being allowed to put it down. "I'm going to say I'm not asking her to believe me," he said slowly, like he was finding the words as he said them. "I'm asking her to let Bree decide." Nadia sat back. That was exactly right. She hadn't coached him into that. It had come from somewhere genuine inside him, from the place where the real thing lives, past the performance and the rehearsal and the fear. And that genuineness was the one thing no judge could be argued out of recognizing. She made a note on her legal pad, and for one moment, just one, she let herself feel what she rarely allowed in this hallway. Something like warmth. Something like, yes, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. Her phone buzzed on the bench beside her. "Andre." One line. "Thinking about you today. Hope the Terrence case goes well." She read it twice, put the phone face down, picked up her legal pad. She was very good at that, at reading warmth and choosing not to let it in. Andre Price was a high school history teacher in East Memphis who loved his students and found them genuinely interesting, which Nadia had initially suspected was a performance and eventually understood was simply the truth of who he was. He had been in her life for 11 months, an eternity by the standard of her own history. He had loved her with a quietness and a consistency she had found, in turns, extraordinary and unbearable. He had proposed on an ordinary Tuesday evening, not with a ring yet, not with a speech, just words. "I want to do this with you, all of it. I want to be here for whatever comes next. I want to be Priya's father." She had ended things 3 days later. She had given him an explanation that was almost true, which is the most efficient kind of lie you can tell both someone else and yourself. The adoption, the timing, Priya's stability. The logic was clean and she had believed every word of it. She had not known that the real reason had nothing to do with Andre, had nothing to do with timing, had everything to do with a 6-year-old girl and a kitchen and a door that hadn't opened when it was supposed to and had never fully opened since. Not yet, she didn't know that yet. The call came at 4:17 in the afternoon. Aunt Rosie was gone. Not unexpected. Rosie had been sick for nearly a year, the slow, particular kind of sick that gives you enough time to say most of what needs saying, but always keeps the most important things just slightly out of reach. Still, Nadia sat in her car in the courthouse parking garage for 4 full minutes before she could turn the key. Rosie was her mother's older sister. Lavender powder and biscuits made from memory, and the specific, unconditional quality of attention that some people have and most don't, the kind that makes you feel, in the room with it, like you are the only thing worth looking at. At Nadia's college graduation, Rosie had held her face in both hands and said, with a seriousness that was not solemn but simply certain, "You are exactly who you were supposed to be." Nadia had believed her. She was good at believing the things that made her feel solid. She drove to Whitehaven through the blue Memphis dusk, past the gas stations and the beauty supply shops and the church marquees with their Thursday night wisdoms. She told herself this was just logistics. Catalog the belongings. Call the estate attorney the Hargrove family kept on permanent retainer. Back in her apartment by 9. Priya had a FaceTime at 8. Nadia was not going to miss it. She pulled into Rosie's driveway and sat for a moment looking at the house. Small, cream-colored, hydrangeas in the front bed that had been glorious in May and were now just dry stalks. The porch light was on a timer, the way it had been for years. Rosie used to say the porch light was for the people who needed to know someone was home. Nadia had always found that beautiful. She thought it now, standing in the driveway, and she allowed herself exactly that much before she went inside and went to work. She was methodical about it. Living room, kitchen, the 2 small bedrooms, inventory on her phone. A system. A system meant you were doing something, and doing something meant you didn't have to feel the full weight of the thing until later, when there was nothing left to do but feel it. The closet in Rosie's bedroom was deep and dark and smelled like cedar and old wool. Winter coats on the left, shoeboxes on the shelf above, a row of church hats in their labeled plastic cases, each one a specific color for a specific kind of Sunday. Nadia was reaching for a hat box when she noticed it. Pushed to the very back of the shelf, behind a stack of folded quilts she hadn't moved yet, a shoebox that was different from the others, older. The cardboard had gone from white to the particular cream of things that have aged quietly in the dark. The corners worn soft. The lid held down with a rubber band that had dried to brittleness over the years and snapped the moment her fingers touched it. She stood in the closet with the box in both hands. She almost put it back. This is the moment she will return to. The last moment of the version of herself she had been for 34 years. Ignorance was available, clean and intact, one decision away. She could have placed the box on the shelf, closed the closet door, walked out of that house and back into her life and never known. She opened the box. The first envelope had her name on the front. Neat handwriting, deliberate, a little cramped the way men write when they learned penmanship in school and never entirely lost the effort of it. The return address was a street in Nashville she didn't know. She pulled out the letter. 1 page, dated the 2nd week of June, 27 years ago, the week of her 7th birthday. Nadia Bug, I keep thinking about the birthday parties your mama used to let me plan when you were small. You always wanted purple balloons. Not just any purple, you were very clear about this and very serious about it. Grape purple, you said, like it was obvious, like I should have known. I don't know if you remember that. I hope you do. I will keep writing until you write back or until you tell me yourself to stop, but I need you to know something more than anything else I could put in a letter. I am not gone. I am right here. I have always been right here. All my love, Dad. Nadia read it again. Then she sat down on the floor of her dead aunt's closet because her legs stopped working. She counted the letters. 28. 1 per year every year, starting with the birthday she would have turned 6, the year her mother sat her down and explained, gently and completely, that her father had made his choice and his choice was not them, all the way to a letter postmarked 5 months ago. He had been writing for 28 years. 28 years of letters delivered to this house, intercepted somewhere between the mailbox and her hands, placed in this box on this shelf, and left here to wait in the dark for a version of events that never arrived. She had grown up 20 minutes away. She had spent 28 years believing he had chosen silence. Outside, the porch light came on its timer, the way it always did. Someone was always supposed to be home. If this story is already landing somewhere real, go ahead and hit that like button right now. It costs you nothing. It tells us to keep bringing you stories that go this deep. Stay with me. We are just getting to the part where everything breaks open. Here is what Nadia did not know. Here is what had been constructed above her head, with money and legal weight and the specific, quiet confidence of people who believe that love gives them the right to control. Loretta Hargrove had not built an empire by being uncertain. She had built it by deciding what she wanted and removing every obstacle between herself and that want with a precision that did not announce itself, because it did not need to. Charlene had learned this before she could articulate it, had absorbed it so completely over so many years that she had lost the ability to distinguish between protecting her daughter and possessing her daughter, between love and management, between a wound of her own and a decision she had the right to make on someone else's behalf. Wendell Ford had loved Charlene the way men love women who are more certain than they are, completely, and with a permanent low-level terror that was always partly reverence and partly dread. They had been young when they married, young when Nadia came. And when the marriage began to fracture under the weight of a difficult period, a year of instability, of depression that made Wendell unreliable in ways that were real and painful, and that he would later, in sobriety, name clearly and take full responsibility for, Charlene had made a decision. Not a decision born of malice. Hold on to that. It matters, not because it absolves her, but because the most damaging things are rarely done by people who know they are causing damage. They are done by people who are absolutely certain they are right. She made a decision born of pain and pride and the unshakable certainty of a woman who had been taught that certainty was the same thing as wisdom. Wendell had hurt her. She was not going to let him hurt Nadia. And when Wendell got sober 18 months later and came back asking, carefully, humbly, through the right channels for a chance to be in his daughter's life, Charlene made a second decision. That second decision was the one. She called Gerald Moss. Gerald Moss had been the Hargrove family attorney for 22 years. He had made other problems disappear, and he made this one disappear too. A letter went out on Hargrove Legal Group letterhead, addressed to Wendell Ford, informing him that any direct contact with Nadia would be considered harassment, that the family had extensive documentation of his prior instability, and that they were prepared to pursue all available legal remedies. All available legal remedies. Wendell Ford was a junior architect at a small downtown firm. He made $41,000 a year. He could not afford to find out what all available legal remedies meant when a Hargrove decided to invoke them. So he did the only thing he had left. He wrote letters. Every year, for 28 years, sent to the one address he had, Rosie's house, where Charlene had once told him Nadia spent her summers. He wrote about small things and large things, about the spelling bee in the newspaper and the drawing on his refrigerator, about what he wished he had said and what he hoped she knew without being told. He wrote with the faith of a man who has been stripped of every other option and keeps going anyway. The specific, quiet faith of someone who has nothing left but the act itself. He believed she had read them. He believed she had chosen not to respond. He spent 28 years believing his daughter had decided he was not worth her time, while the woman in the house 20 minutes away sat at Sunday dinners and watched her daughter push away every person who ever tried to get close and never said one word. Nadia found the attorney's letter on a Wednesday, buried beneath the birthday cards, Hargrove Legal Group letterhead, dated when she was 8 years old. She found her mother's letter on a Thursday, one page, Charlene's precise, familiar cursive, addressed to Wendell. Nadia has received your letters. She has read them. She has asked me to tell you that she does not wish to have any further contact. She is happy, Wendell. She has moved on. The kindest thing you can do for your daughter now is let her be happy. The date was Nadia's 9th birthday. She would have been in 3rd grade. She was still learning cursive that year. She could not yet reliably spell the word kindest. She drove to Nashville on a Tuesday. She did not call ahead. She had no plan, no script, no system. She just drove down I-40 with Memphis shrinking in the rear view, and the Tennessee heat pressing everything flat and the radio off because the silence had more to say than anything else. The hospice was a low beige building off the interstate. It worked very hard to feel like a place where people lived, and it mostly succeeded. Flowers near the entrance. A wind chime by the door, moving in the August air, making a sound that was doing its best to be peaceful. The woman at the front desk had the particular calibrated gentleness of someone who has worked in that building for years. The kind that knows the difference between a family member arriving just in time and one arriving too late. Wendell Ford, Nadia said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that and briefly hated herself for being proud of it. I'm his daughter. The woman's face did the thing that faces do when the answer is already embedded in the verb tense. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. Mr. Ford passed about 4 months ago, but we have a nurse who spent a great deal of time with him near the end if you'd like to speak with her. She's in today. Nadia nodded. She could not speak. She was a woman who had built her entire professional identity around finding words in rooms where other people had run out of them. She had nothing right now. She was standing in a hospice lobby 4 months too late and she had nothing. Patricia Wills was 53, short, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. The matter-of-fact, unsentimental gentleness of someone who had helped too many people die to be rattled by grief anymore. She brought Nadia to a family room with bad lighting and chairs arranged toward each other, and a ficus in the corner that was doing its best. She did not ask why Nadia hadn't come sooner. That not asking was its own kind of mercy. He talked about you every day, Patricia said, not softly, not as consolation, just plainly the way you say a true thing that matters. He didn't know I never received his letters, Nadia said. No, he believed you had read them and chosen not to respond. He told me once that he understood. He said he just needed you to know he had never stopped. Patricia took out her phone, old, cracked screen, oversized case. She scrolled for a moment and turned it around. The photograph was low quality and badly lit. Wendell Ford was in a hospital bed, thin the way illness makes people thin, but sitting up. And in his hands he was holding a piece of construction paper. A child's drawing. A house with a yellow sun floating in the upper right corner the way children always draw suns, not in the sky but above everything, claiming the whole world. Crayon, purple and green. Nadia knew that drawing. She had made it in 2nd grade, had been very proud of it, had never known what happened to it after her mother mailed it that one time early on before the silence fully calcified. The one moment something of Nadia's had traveled in his direction. He had kept it for 27 years. In the front pocket of every jacket he owned. He had held it in his hands at the end. Nadia looked at that photograph for a long time. Patricia did not move, did not speak, just let the silence be what it needed to be. Did he ever say whether he was angry? Nadia asked finally. He was sad, Patricia said. Sad is different from angry. He said the one regret he couldn't put down was that he'd let them convince him that staying silent was kindness. That disappearing was the generous thing to do. He said that was his failure and he carried it all the way to the end. Nadia drove back to Memphis that night without the radio. The silence was enormous and specific and had weight. She drove through it the whole way home. I need you in the comments right now. If there is someone in your life you have not spoken to in too long, a parent, a child, someone you told yourself the distance was about them when really it was about you, say something. Write it here, because someone watching this needs to know they are not the only one. Go. Before we go further, before the confrontation, before the hearing, before the part where everything built on a lie has to come down, I need you to understand something about Nadia. I need you to understand the men. Because the lie did not just steal her father, that alone would have been devastating enough. But it did something else, something longer and quieter and more total. It installed a belief so foundational inside her that she had stopped experiencing it as a belief. It had become architecture, the structure she moved through without ever noticing the structure. The belief was this: men leave. Men leave, and the only protection is to be already leaving when they go, or to never allow anyone close enough that their departure costs you anything real. She had lived by this for 28 years without ever identifying it as a wound. It had disguised itself so completely as wisdom, as discernment, as standards, as the considered choices of a self-aware woman who simply hadn't found the right situation yet, that she had never once thought to look behind it. It was not wisdom. It was a child protecting herself from a pain that had already happened, a pain handed to her by someone else, dressed up as her father's choice. The first man she sent away was in law school, kind, ambitious, entirely genuine. She ended it the week after he mentioned, casually, almost parenthetically, that he imagined they'd probably end up in the same city someday. The word someday had felt like a closing door. She had stepped back from it and not returned. The second was a doctor. He took her to meet his mother on their 5th date, which she experienced as presumptuous and understood years later was simply a man who was certain about what he wanted and saw no reason to hide it. She ended it in a way she wasn't proud of. The third had built her a bookshelf on their 3rd date. She had mentioned offhandedly that she'd ordered one online that hadn't arrived. He showed up the following Saturday with lumber and a level and built it in her living room in 2 hours without being asked and without making it a thing. She watched him do it with a feeling in her chest she could only describe as terror. She ended things 2 weeks later. And then there was Andre. Andre, who remembered the name of every student she had ever mentioned, who asked follow-up questions weeks later, who had been in her life for 11 months, and who had loved her with a steadiness that did not require her performance or her gratitude. Andre, who had said on an ordinary Tuesday evening with no ceremony and no ring, "I want to do this with you, all of it. I want to be here for whatever comes next. I want to be Priya's father." And whom she had walked away from 72 hours later. She had done it cleanly. She was always clean about it, composed, reasonable, never cruel. She had given him an explanation that was almost true: timing, complexity, Priya's stability, airtight. She had not known, could not have known, that she was not turning down Andre. She was turning down her father, over and over and over, every single time, wearing different faces each time but always the same motion, always the same 6-year-old girl stepping back from the door. She understood this, sitting alone in her kitchen 3 days after Nashville, with everything from the shoebox spread across the table like a case file. The letters, Gerald Moss's correspondence, her mother's handwriting, 28 years of documented, funded, systematically maintained erasure arranged in front of her in order. She was good at reading case files. It was what she did. She read this one until she couldn't anymore. Then she opened her phone and looked at the list. 47 names, 47 fathers. She looked at the list for a long time and felt something she had never felt while looking at it before. Not pride, not the warm professional satisfaction she had always allowed herself. Grief. The The grief of someone who has finally understood what they were doing all along without knowing they were doing it. She added one name to the top, before all the others. Wendell Ford. Then she put the phone down and prepared herself for what had to come next. Charlene Ford arrived on a Thursday the way she always arrived, bearing food, bearing perfume, bearing the absolute certainty of a woman who had never once in her adult life arrived anywhere without being wanted. She set a casserole dish on Nadia's counter and was in the middle of a sentence about the church fundraiser when Nadia placed the shoebox on the kitchen table. Charlene stopped. She looked at the box, then she looked at Nadia, and her face did something Nadia had never seen it do in 34 years. It went completely still. Not blank. Still. The way a face goes still when the moment it has been rehearsing for has finally, after everything, arrived. "Sit down, Mama." She sat. She folded her hands on the table. She was wearing her good rings, the ones she wore to church and to occasions that required a certain weight, and Nadia looked at those rings for one moment and understood, wordlessly, that they had been chosen deliberately. Nadia laid out everything, methodically, in order, the letters, all 28, Gerald Moss and his letterhead and his all available legal remedies applied to a man making $41,000 a year. The letter in Charlene's own cursive, telling Wendell that his 9-year-old daughter had read his letters and wanted him to stop. The phone call to the high school during Nadia's junior year, when she was 17 years old and sitting in AP English 20 feet from the administrative office, where her mother was having a conversation that was Nadia's to have, not hers. She went through all of it without raising her voice. Charlene listened. Her hands stayed flat on the table. The refrigerator ran. When Nadia finished, the kitchen held the specific silence of a room that has received something it cannot give back. Charlene breathed in, breathed out. "I did what I thought was right." 4 syllables, said not defensively, but with the weight of something repeated to oneself so many times it has become indistinguishable from fact. Nadia looked at her mother. "You did what felt safe for you," she said. Her voice was level. She had spent 3 days finding level, and she held it now. "You were hurt and you were proud and you were scared he was going to hurt me the way he hurt you. And that first part, I can almost trace the path that got you there. But then he came back sober and humble and asking for the right things the right way, and you made a second decision. You called Gerald Moss. You used the family name and the family money. You wrote a letter in my name when I was 9 years old and told him his daughter wanted him gone. And then you watched me for 25 more years and never said one word. You watched me end things with every man who ever tried to love me. You watched me decide I was going to become a mother completely alone because I could not risk Priya growing up the way I had. You watched all of it." She paused just for one beat. "He died alone, Mama, 4 months ago, still asking the nurses if I had ever called, and the answer was always no. Because you decided when I was 6 years old that you would be the one who decided what I got to know about my own life, and you kept deciding that for 28 years. The silence was enormous. Charlene's chin moved, just slightly. The rings caught the kitchen light. "I loved you," she said, and it was true. That was the unbearable thing about it. It was completely, unambiguously true. Everything I did, every single thing I did because I loved you." "I know," Nadia said, quietly, without hesitation. "That is the most devastating part of this entire thing, I know." Charlene left an hour later. She took the casserole. Nadia stood at the window and watched the car pull away. The rage in her chest did not diminish, but it clarified, became specific and cold and precise, not a fire consuming everything but a light, clear, permanent, illuminating every room she had ever moved through in the dark. Every corner looked different now. Every corner had been there all along. "I have to put something in the room right now." Have you ever been protected from something in a way that cost you more than the thing itself would have? Have you ever been the one doing the protecting, telling yourself it was for someone else when, if you are truly honest, it was for you. Put it in the comments. Not for me. For the person watching this who has never heard anyone else say it out loud. The adoption review was scheduled for 6 days after the confrontation. A neighbor had reported the raised voices to the building manager. The building manager had a contact at the adoption agency. The contact had flagged it. The review board would convene to formally assess whether Nadia's home environment met the stability standards required for placement. 3 years. Priya had been waiting for this placement for 3 years. Nadia had been working toward it for nearly 2. She sat in her bathroom on the morning of the review and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. Gray suit pressed, hair done. She looked like everything was completely under control. She knew from the outside was not going to be enough today. Because she understood, with a clarity that felt less like a decision and more like something breaking open, that the version of herself she had always performed in high-stakes rooms, airtight, composed, unimpeachable, was the version built on the lie, was made of the same material as the lie, and she was done building on that foundation. She picked up her keys. The review board was 5 people behind a long table, 3 women and 2 men. Institutional lighting, a water pitcher nobody had touched. The board chair was a woman named Dr. Paulette Sims, late 60s, the particular look of someone who had heard every possible version of a person trying to present as a better parent than they were, and who had long since stopped being moved by the performance of stability. She would be moved by honesty. Nadia was betting everything on that. She sat down and she told the truth. 6 weeks ago I discovered something devastating about my own childhood, she said, not with careful modulation, not with courtroom register, just plainly. I found letters from my father, 28 years of letters, that had been intercepted and hidden from me. I discovered that my family used legal resources and generational wealth to prevent my father from having any contact with me. I found out that he died 4 months ago alone, still hoping I would reach out. That has been among the most painful experiences of my life. I'm not going to tell you it hasn't affected me. It has, profoundly. I'm working through it. I will continue working through it. The room was quiet. And how does that affect your capacity to be a stable and present parent to this child? Dr. Sims asked. Nadia held the silence for one breath. For 8 years I have stood in courthouse hallways and told fathers that showing up imperfectly is still showing up. That the work of being a parent is not about being without damage. It is about being honest about your damage and doing the work regardless. I have said that to 47 people and asked courts to believe it. I am asking this board to extend me the same belief I have spent 8 years asking this court to extend to others. She paused. I know, in a way I could not have known 6 weeks ago and will never be able to unknow, exactly what it costs a child to grow up believing they were not chosen. I know what that belief does to a person over decades, what it builds inside them, what it closes. I will spend the rest of my life making sure Priya never has to carry that, not for one single day. Dr. Sims wrote something on her notepad. The hearing lasted 40 more minutes. Nadia answered every question. She did not perform. She did not construct. She did not reach for the version of herself that had always worked in rooms like this. She just told the truth. For the first time in a long time, that was the only thing she offered. She walked out into the August heat and stood on the sidewalk. Then she saw it. A black Camry, 2 rows from the entrance. She recognized the dented rear bumper before she recognized anything else. She had teased him about that dent. He had promised more than once to get it fixed. Andre was in the driver's seat. Not coming in, not making himself visible, just there, present. Deshawn had told him something significant was happening today. Andre had not asked for details. He had just come. He was sitting in a parking lot in the August heat so she would not walk out of a hard room alone. She stood on the sidewalk and looked at his car. Then she walked to her own and got in. She was not ready for the conversation it would require. Not yet, but she did not drive away. She sat there, 2 rows between them, the heat pressing down on everything. And for the first time in 28 years, she did not immediately reach for the explanation that would make the feeling safe, did not construct the reason it didn't mean what it felt like it meant, did not find the exit. She just sat there, in the heat, in the feeling, in the reality of a man who had come to a parking lot for her. For 5 full minutes, she let it be real. The approval came 8 days later. By 2:14 in the afternoon, an email. She read it 3 times. She put her phone face down on her desk and pressed both palms flat against the wood and breathed. Deshawn knocked on her office door. She said nothing. He came in anyway. He looked at her face and she looked at his, and he nodded slowly once and said, "Go get your daughter." Nadia woke before the alarm on the morning. She went to pick up Priya. She lay in the dark and listened to the apartment breathe. Then she got up and went to the doorway of the small bedroom and stood there. Purple walls. Priya had chosen the color from a paint swatch with the solemn deliberation of someone making a permanent decision, which, Nadia had understood, was exactly what it was. A bookshelf full of books she had been collecting for months, a lamp that made a warm circle, a stuffed elephant on the pillow that had been waiting there for 6 weeks. She thought about a man she had never met, holding a crayon drawing in a hospice bed in Nashville. She thought about great purple balloons. She thought about 28 letters sitting in a box in a closet, patient as stone, waiting for someone to finally open them. She thought about Andre and his car, and the 5 minutes in the parking lot, and the letter she had read at the kitchen table, the letter her father had written to a man he had never met. "Don't prove it, just stay. That's the whole job, just stay." She was not going to solve everything today. Today had one thing in it. She drove to the agency in the early morning, when Memphis was still cool and the light was still pale, and the city had not yet made up its mind about the day. She signed the final papers with Ms. Totham, Priya's caseworker, who cried a little at the edges of her composure and apologized for it. And Nadia said, "Please don't apologize for that." And then they brought Priya in. Yellow dress, backpack packed with the careful thoroughness of someone who has learned to be ready for things not to last, stuffed elephant tucked under one arm, 7 years old and already so precise about hope. She walked in and she saw Nadia and she stopped. Nadia looked at this child, this 7-year-old who had spent her entire short life learning how much to want, calibrating the exact amount of hope that could be carried without becoming a liability, and felt something move through her so completely she had to hold very still. "Are we going home now?" Priya asked, carefully, in the voice she kept for wanting things that might not happen. Nadia crouched down to her level, looked at her directly. "Yeah, baby," she said, "we're going home." Priya walked forward and put her arms around Nadia's neck. And Nadia held on, longer than she meant to. She pressed her face into Priya's hair and she thought, not as a decision, just as a fact arriving. This is what he was trying to get back to, all of it. Every letter, every year, every attempt that ran into a wall. He was trying to get back to exactly this. She did not say it out loud. But she thought it, and she let herself think it, and she held her daughter and she did not let go. That night, after Priya had eaten and bathed and chosen her pajamas with grave seriousness, and asked 3 questions about the elephant's name, and settled finally into the purple-walled room that was now entirely hers, Nadia sat on the edge of the bed. She had been thinking about this moment since Nashville. She reached into the nightstand drawer and took out one of the letters, not the first and not the last, one from the middle, written when Nadia was 12, the year her class won the regional spelling bee, and her photo had been in the Memphis newspaper. He had found it. He had cut it out. He had put it on his refrigerator. He wrote that she had her grandmother's forehead. He wrote that he hoped she was reading good books because she had always loved being read to. He wrote, I think about you every single day. I don't say that so you'll feel sorry for me. I say it because somewhere in the world you should know that someone is thinking about you every day and thinking, that kid right there is going to do something extraordinary. I can tell from here. She read it aloud. She did not explain who had written it. She just let the words be in the room. His voice, finally, in the place it had been kept from for 28 years. Priya was quiet for a long moment. Who wrote that? Nadia folded the letter with care. Someone who loved me a long time ago, before I knew he did. Priya thought about this with the full weight she brought to important things. Did you know in time? The lamp made its warm circle. Memphis exhaled outside the window. Not in time to tell him, Nadia said, but in time to do something with it. She kissed Priya's forehead, left the door open just slightly, just enough, went to the kitchen. On the table was the last unopened letter from the box. She had been circling it for weeks. It was addressed differently from all the others, not to Nadia, in her father's cramped, deliberate handwriting. To my daughter's husband, whoever you are. Written in the last months of his life, a letter to a man he had never met, for a future he would not be part of. Written anyway, because that was who Wendell Ford was, a man who wrote into the silence even when the silence never wrote back. She opened it. I don't know your name or your face or the story of how she let you in. I hope it's a good story. I hope she didn't make it too hard on you, because she will, not because she's difficult but because someone made her believe, a long time ago, before she was old enough to know better, that love is something that leaves. She's going to be waiting for you to prove that. Every day, in ways you won't always see, she's going to be braced for you to go. Don't go. That's the whole thing. That's the entire job. Don't prove her right, just stay. Stay when it's hard and stay when she pushes and stay when she tests you the way people test the things they cannot afford to lose. Be the answer to the question she has been asking her whole life. I should have been part of that answer. I wasn't given the chance. You are. Don't waste it. Nadia sat with that letter for a long time. Then she picked up her phone. Andre's name at the top of her recent calls. She looked at it. The cursor blinked. She thought about everything, the 28 letters, the crayon drawing, the hospice, the parking lot, the 5 minutes she had let something real be real, the list on her phone, the name she had added at the top. She put the phone down. Not yet. She was not ready yet. There was still work to do inside herself, in the wreckage of a story she had lived by for 34 years. You cannot build on broken ground without clearing it first. She knew this. She had spent her career telling other people this. But she stood up. She walked to her front door. She put her hand on the knob and stood there for a long moment. Then she opened it. Not all the way, just enough. The August night came in warm and thick and smelling like Memphis, asphalt and night blooming something, and very far away, the river. Cicadas in every tree. The porch light across the way was on its timer, the way porch lights come on. She stood in the doorway. She was not ready. But she had opened the door. For the first time since she was 6 years old, for the first time since a kitchen and a story and a silence that became an entire architecture, she had opened the door. Her father had written, "That's the whole job, just stay." She was learning. She was finally learning. Let me sit here with you for a moment before we go. Because this story is not about a shoebox, not really, not at its deepest. It is about the lies we inherit, the ones that arrive before we are old enough to interrogate them, the ones that get so thoroughly inside us that we stop feeling them as beliefs and start feeling them as facts, start building on them, start making choices from them, start becoming slowly, over years, the person the lie required us to be. The lie Nadia was told was that her father chose to leave. The truth was that someone else made that choice and handed it to her as if it were his. and she spent 28 years paying the cost of someone else's decision. Every man she walked away from, every proposal she deflected with a clean, reasonable explanation, every moment she felt permanence reaching for her and stepped back from it. Every morning she woke up certain that love was something that leaves, because the first love in her life had left, or so she had been told, and that certainty became the lens through which she saw every love that came after. All of it, the entire architecture, built on one lie, told by one woman who loved her daughter and could not tell the difference between love and control. Here is what I want you to take with you today. The wound you do not examine does not wait for you to be ready. It makes decisions for you. It shows up in the way you leave before you can be left, in the distance you keep between yourself and the people who want to get close, close enough that it looks like caution, close enough that it looks like standards, but just far enough that nothing can really reach you. In the way you build a life that looks whole from the outside and has a hollow at the center that you don't talk about because you don't have words for it yet. Nadia didn't need words. She needed a shoebox. You might not have a shoebox waiting for you somewhere. You might just have a conversation you have been putting off, a phone number you keep almost calling, a door you have been keeping closed because some part of you learned a long time ago that doors are dangerous. Open it anyway. Not when you're ready, you may never feel ready. Not when you've resolved everything and arrived at some clean, finished place of healing. Nadia was standing in the middle of the worst month of her life when she opened that door. She was not healed. She was not whole. She was a woman in a doorway in the August dark, not ready, doing it anyway. That is what the beginning of healing actually looks like. Not arrival, just the door, just opening it. I want to hear from you. In the comments right now, is there a door in your life that has been closed too long? A relationship built on a story you were handed before you were old enough to write your own. Something you have been braced against that you could, if you chose, put down. This is a safe room. Say it here, because somebody watching this right now needs to know they are not the only one carrying it. If this story found something in you today, if it touched something you've been trying to find the words for, please subscribe to Fortune Vault Chronicles right now. Hit that bell. Share this with one person who needs to hear it. We are here every week with stories that do not let you off easy. Stories that go somewhere real. Stories that ask something real of you. That is what we do, and we are just getting started. Next time on Fortune Vault Chronicles. A man spends 40 years believing his mother died, giving birth to him. Then someone who knew her hands him a photograph. And every story he has ever told himself about who he is and where he came from, has to be taken apart and rebuilt from the ground up. You don't want to miss that one.